My name is Christine Robbins, and my group is Citizens for Property Rights. And this is the Rights of Man Summit, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. We have some wonderful guests for you tonight. We have two former borough assemblymen, Mike Prox and Hank Bartos. We have a candidate for borough assembly, is Sam Tuck. Did I say the wrong one? Sorry. We have the head of Americans for Prosperity Alaska Division, Jeremy Price, with us tonight. A candidate for State House, District 4, Jim Sackett. And our candidate for governor, Scott Hawkins. So please welcome them tonight. Citizens for Property Rights is all about standing against arbitrary, heavy-handed government intrusion into our lives. And so when we present these things for you every month, it's so you can get involved, so you can be informed and learn what's happening that goes on all the time behind closed doors and in meetings that no one wants to bother to attend. So the more you get involved, the more informed you are, and then you can make a difference in your life and others. So how it's going to happen tonight, I'll present the order, or actually I'll just introduce the speaker between each speaker, so I'll get up and introduce it. And then the timing, if you guys do not get my message, then I'll hold up a 5 card if you have 5 minutes left, and then the big red dot for you to stop, and we'll take questions from you guys. So, and with that, I'm going to announce our first speaker, and that's Mike Prox. Mike?
Thank you, Christine. Whoa, that works. What I wanted to talk about this evening, I guess starting off with the concept, just to remind ourselves of the concept of a right. What is a right? Because we, as a community, we don't quite have that down. We think we have a right to a lot of stuff. We have a right to a dividend, we have a right to education, we have a right to this, we have a right to that. Well, we don't. A right is something that we have because we are us, comes from God. And it doesn't take anyone else to do something in order for us to have that right. Important distinction. Real important. So do you have a right to an education? Well, no. It requires somebody else to teach you in order for you to be educated. So you don't have a right to an education. And then it gets a little confusing. We have a right to heat our homes. Agreed? A lot of people think they have a right to breathe clean air. They got a point. We have to recognize that sometimes our individual rights conflict. So we do have to come to some sort of a compromise. And when we talk to each other, we can't be too adamant about our right to education or a number of things if it comes in conflict with someone else. And that's just so we can get along in society. And we're all talking about governing, and we're supposed to be a self-governing society. Well, what does self-governing mean? It means governing yourself first. And then we need less of government imposed upon us. But self-governing is not democracy. It's not the same thing. It's not a group of people getting together for the majority to decide what the minority is going to do. And we tend to forget that as well, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Prelude, too. What I was really going to talk about tonight was testifying before boards, and in particular the assembly. I was on the North Star Borough Assembly. 2000, long time ago. And we really do need, from an assembly member's perspective, we really do need a lot more citizen participation in those meetings. And we need citizens talking to the assembly in terms of their right, not their want, their right. Because what people tend to do at all of these meetings is somebody who wants something comes down and asks for it because it means a lot to them. It might mean a $50,000, $60,000 a year job. It might be a free swimming pool. It might be lower rates for the buses. But they're inclined to do that. When you go to Fred Meyer's, you go to Fred Meyer's to get something. You don't go to Fred Meyer's to tell them what you don't want. And that's what happens. It's an economic thing. And people that don't want something, if you don't get what you don't want, you might save 10 cents off your tax bill. Not a lot of reason to go down and spend an evening at the assembly. But it is really important to do that. And even with the makeup of the assembly that we have now, I think it is, if you will, as far out in the weeds as the assembly was when I decided I needed to run 10, 15 years ago, whenever that was. They are a long ways out in the weeds. They think that the government has all power, and they will do whatever they can unless somebody stops them. That's not true. But they need to hear, no, you don't have that. And even with that, from the couple of times that I've been down, people talking on this wood smoke stuff, the public testimony has really been good and effective. And don't think that you have to know everything about everything to be down there and talk to the assembly. The heartfelt testimony is often more persuasive than a good factual argument, because facts can be debated. So how does that work? How do you make your testimony more effective? Well, first is just be there and understand how it works. You have to wait your turn. You have 3 minutes. They can ask you questions. You can ask questions, but they don't have to answer them. They're there to hear you, not for you to ask questions of them. Just be ready for that. And don't be afraid of them. If you don't know, just say, I don't know. That's fine. But your heartfelt testimony is important. If you want to go the next step and be more prepared for it, the way that the schedule works is on a given Thursday, the assembly meets as an assembly every 2 weeks, but on the other week, they meet as a committee of the whole, and the agenda is published for the committee of the whole. What they're going to be talking about a week after that meeting is published, and you can go down to the committee of the whole meeting if you're interested in something and get some of the details. So then you're more prepared to address whatever they're going to be talking about the next week, and that really helps. There isn't an opportunity for public testimony, but there's generally an opportunity to talk to an assembly member one-on-one, which is generally better anyway. So if you're really interested in something, go down the week before to the committee of the whole meeting or look on their website and at least see what's on the agenda. Then you're that much more prepared for that. And that really kind of is all there is to it. Then you can spend as much time as you want from there. But those two things, be there, even heartfelt testimony is effective and it's worthwhile and helpful. And the more you can be there to address exactly what they're talking about and know what their questions have been, the better your time is spent. I think I'll just leave it. Hopefully somebody has questions from that, anything. Or we can save time. Good. Well, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Sam Tuck. Sam?
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate you letting me come here and speak for just a few minutes. Christine had asked me to speak on just a couple of topics. One of them is very short on my list of Second Amendment rights. I do not have anything to say on Second Amendment rights, but I think it's a constitutional right. I see a lot of people that are trying to attack the Second Amendment, and I know they want to do something. They feel like they have to do something. Taking firearms out of someone's hands, a legal person, is a waste of time. That gun is not going to jump up, run out the door, and shoot someone. Just a fact. So my stance on the Second Amendment is pretty simple. Leave it alone. That's it. Another couple of things that Christine asked me to talk about was what we need to do to win this fall. The other side, and I say that kind of hesitantly, I have some great friends that are on the other side, but I can agree with them as far as being friends. Politically, we don't agree on anything. But they are good friends, no doubt. They're good people. I know a lot of people try to demonize certain ones, and I don't go for that. I really don't. But politically, we are miles apart. I hope at times that we can find some middle ground. The reason I'm standing up here tonight is because it looks like, to me, my opinion, middle ground has been lost. I will echo what Mike said. Everyone needs to participate in the process. You need to go down to the borough meetings and be heard. Whether it does any good, I don't know, but I still think you need to put your voice out there. Just complaining is not. To win this fall, though, it's going to require more than just being upset with the way things are going and telling everybody, I don't agree with this and I don't agree with that. It's going to require talking to people, getting out in the community and talking to people, picking up the phone and calling people and asking them, what do you think of this candidate? What do you think of what's going on? It cannot just be, I'm voting for so-and-so and that's it. That's not going to work, I can tell you. It just won't. So if you don't like the way things are, you're going to have to become involved. That's going to require getting out and speaking. And the reason I hold my arms like this, I always debate on whether to tell this to people. I suffer from tremors, so I have problems at times just standing still. I know that's a tough thing for somebody to understand, but that's the way it is. So sometimes I just stand like this. It's not that I'm so much nervous, I just have tremors. So I try to tell everybody that up front. But anyway, the question was also asked, what will I do? I will do what is right if I own the assembly. I can tell you one person alone cannot change the vote on the assembly. I can't do it alone. No way. If you don't like the way things are going, you're going to have to change the makeup of the assembly. Just pure and simple. But one person can't do it. Can have a voice, but you're not going to change it in the vote. I mean, it comes down to numbers. I'm a numbers person. You don't have the numbers, you're not going to win. Just the bottom line, that's the way it is. So, yeah. I think there's a bill now down in the House, isn't it? Somebody maybe can help me on firearms, trying to come up with some bill to take firearms from someone if they are mentally ill. I have mixed emotions on that. We have a number of laws on the books already that take care of that, really. I don't know why we're going back and replowing that. Looks to me like we're just trying to, it's one of those knee-jerk reactions, in my opinion. We're trying to go back and recreate the wheel. Because I don't understand how they're going to be able to go up to someone. Are you going to be able to say, they're mentally ill and just go in the house, take their guns? That's a violation of your rights. I don't understand. Anyway, I would appreciate your support in my endeavor to try to get on the Borough Assembly. It's totally out of character for me, but I had just gotten to the point that I felt like I needed to do something. That's why I'm here. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Try to answer them. Yes. I do have a website. It's Sam Tuck FNSB. I'm also on Facebook, Sam Tuck FNSB, I believe the same thing on Facebook. Yeah. Just touching on the Second Amendment quickly, I'm not going to hold you up. I was a former firearms instructor with the state of Virginia for years with their special weapons, so I'm very familiar with them. I cannot understand why people are always having this knee-jerk reaction to come up with some kind of gun control. I have yet to see where gun control would have solved any shooting that I ever worked at all, and I worked a bunch of them. Saw a lot of suffering. I'll just leave it at that. Second Amendment.
Mike here. So, not to put you on the spot, but since you're up here,
Yeah.
one of the difficult decisions that the Assembly consistently has to face is home foreclosures. And Assembly Member Lance Roberts is consistently standing for people's rights to own property and for the government not to seize that property. And so have you considered how long someone has a right to their property without paying taxes? And so some of the Assembly members would take it as soon as they're late, where other members might give them more grace period.
Oh, yeah. I know. It's funny you asked that. I just posted something on Facebook about this the quarterly report about foreclosures. Although it's a year old, that's the newest thing they've got out. Foreclosures were up, I think it was 167% in the month of September in 2017, borough. Now, that's only one monthly number, I know, but that's a tremendous jump. And it's a year old, a little over a year old information, but that's the most current thing they've got out there. I'm a person that likes to talk, believe it or not. I walk around the community a lot. Van Horn is my drag. I mean, that's where I know all those guys over there, so, you know, I'm talking with them all the time. I can tell you how the economy is doing week to week. Really, it's easy. You go over there, you talk to some of the contractors and the suppliers, you know, I've got so much work for 6 months out, a year out, I don't have any work. It's easy to tell. Now, if the borough is using this report that I read, and it's over a year old, to base all their decisions on, it's horrible. That's old. Even the information they had in there about people migrating away from Fairbanks was wrong, because that was published, you know, the newest information was in the paper just a week ago, I believe. So I like to talk. Maybe that's good or bad, but at least I can tell personally, I'm comfortable saying whether the economy is good, bad, steady. I'm not relying on a report a year old. So as far as the foreclosures, though, I don't know. In this current economy, it's not good. I'm not going to be taking somebody's property once they come up, you know, having paid their month behind. That's not going to work for me. You may be forced to do it if it's a year behind at some point, but, and quite honestly, people look at this different ways. My opinion, you're renting your property from the time you buy it till you die or leave. That's just a fact of life. Taxes is a pretty darn high up here. I came up here in 2001 the first time, stayed for almost 6 years, left, went back, did a job in Charlotte, was all traveling all over the country, came back again. Now I've been here about another 5 years. Taxes have really gotten pricey because they don't add in road commission. You know, that's a big thing with me. My particular area, we pay the highest road tax in the borough, and which is fine. We have nice roads, but the borough doesn't even consider that road tax. That's a percentage of whatever the tax base is. So, you know, Our taxes right now on just a simple home that we live in is about $7,000 a year. That's pretty pricey. Pretty darn. Thank you.
What most people don't realize is that your rights are being taken away via zoning laws, and so it would behoove us to go attend these Borough Assembly meetings. Now let's welcome Hank Bartos, for the former Borough Assemblyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're here. I wish we had more. You know, the signs say Rights of Man Summit. Well, it's rights of mankind, and we're all members of mankind. And as so, we have certain inalienable rights: the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In 1967, I took an oath when I joined the United States Air Force to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I have lived in Alaska since 1981. I came up here in the Air Force as a fighter pilot at Austin Air Force Base, and I retired in 1986. I have had the privilege of serving on the Assembly for 16 years, at least 5 of those years as presiding officer. And I think we all owe a debt to our community. You know, you have to pay rent to live in our community, and that rent is your service, your dedication, what you do to make the community a better place to live. And I think that's incumbent upon all of us. That's what we pay, that's what we do. Now, why are you here? Why did you give up your dinner time and whatever and show up here tonight to sit in this room and listen to some people talk? Well, the reason you did is because you want to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're talking the right to burn wood. I am high mileage. I'm a pretty old guy. They tell me that PM 2.5 is going to destroy my lungs and that I'm going to die of an early death. Well, I'll tell you, I have a wood stove, I have an outdoor wood boiler, and I live right off of Newby Road in the Triangle of Death. It is absolutely the worst place in the borough to live, and at my age, you know, I'm worried. I want to breathe clean air. But am I getting the opportunity to breathe clean air and to heat my house with wood? When I first moved into my house, the state of Alaska had a program where they would give you, a 5% energy loan so that I could buy a wood coal boiler and that I could buy a wood stove. So I took advantage of that. You know, at that time, back in '86, the interest rates were 12 and 14%, so a 5% energy loan kind of worked pretty good. So I took advantage of it, and I used the wood coal boiler because I have a wife and 2 young girls, and at the time, and as you know, shouldn't say this, but with young girls, you know, we did 18, 20 loads of wash a week because they don't want to mix their stuff up. So, you know, we did that, and I used the wood coal to heat the water and to heat the house to do it. I didn't like paying for oil. And when oil got to be $4 a gallon, I really didn't like paying for it. And now it's going back up in that direction. So we want the right to burn wood, but we want to do it where it's not harming anybody. But I don't think we have the science to show whether we're harming anyone or not. The EPA comes down and says, hey, you know, this PM 2.5 is pretty serious, and, you know, we need to do something about it, so we're going to put these little restrictions on. DEC grabs those restrictions and says, hey, this is really serious, we got to go one better. And so DEC goes one better. Then the Borough Assembly gets it, and we have to qualify, or the borough staff gets it and says, we have to qualify with the DEC and EPA regulations, but you know, we need to have a little measure of safety in there, so then they go a little harder. And by the time they get through with all of this, and over a period of time, those things have been watered down so that are they accurate or not? Does a certain level, an ungogram or whatever you call it, or PM 2.5 really harm you? You know, last winter I had the borough come out and they said, Mr. Bartos, could we plug in one of our little machines in your yard? Well, sure, go ahead. They said it cost you about $3 to $5 a month. I said, go ahead, you know, I want clean air. And he could tell which way the wind blew through the property. He knew all of that. And he'd come out about every 3 or 4 days and check his machine, had a little light on it. And I said, how does this thing work? He said, well, we got a little air collector here, and it spins around. And when it spins out some of the pollutants, and what it doesn't spin out, it collects. And that's how we measure it. And I said, well, there's a little spinner in there. Does the cold weather impact that spinner? Now, I know cold weather impacts electric motors. It tends to slow them down a little bit, so we get as accurate a count as we think we are. We're also faced with an inversion. As a pilot out at Eielson Air Force Base, as soon as I got down the runway, and it'd be 30 below. As soon as I got down, the gear flaps came up, and the temperature gauge was reading minus 30. By the time I was 1,500 feet, it read plus 30. So with that heavy of a inversion, it does mean a lot. And we have to be cognizant of that. But we cannot overdo it. Now, I was at the town hall meeting they had here a couple of weeks ago, and the guy from EPA, you could tell he was a heavy-handed rascal, that he was going to enforce. Well, and then the gal from DEC that was there, boy, she was backing him up. Yep, we're going to stomp out this PM 2.5. But my question is, what is the science behind that? And who is looking after me with my wood stove and my outdoor wood boiler? And I have got the cleanest that you can buy. I researched it. I went to the borough. I said, what is the cleanest machines I can buy? And I spent a lot of money on it. And so I got those. And now, you know, they're wanting me to not do it. So they say, and I question how they go about doing this. You know, they'll come out with a text saying, you know, the air quality in North Pole is stage 1 or stage 2 from now until 4:15 on the 22nd. You know, I go to the weather channel on my smartphone, and it's got a different date and a different time. So who's figuring this out? And do we have any kind of staff there at the borough that has weather training and technology so they can forecast? How do they know what these dates and times are and the airflows and things? What kind of analysis do they make, or do they just say, well, we're going to kick it off on Thursday and until Monday? Well, they don't work on the weekends, so even if it gets good, they're not going to change it. So that's hamstrings. Now, I load up my boiler, put wood in my wood stove, and then all of a sudden, boom, this comes out. Now, what do? Do I call the fire department to come put it out? Do I get a fire extinguisher to do it? No, I just let it burn. Now, the air cops are going to come out, and they're going to say, Bartos, you've got smoke coming out of your outdoor boiler. So what? I can't do anything about it unless you want me to just put it out. And I'll have to call the fire department to do that. And, you know, if you want to pick the tab up, whatever, you know, we'll go for it. Now, I'm in the real estate business. I own Gold Standard Real Estate Company with my daughter. And I've been in the business here since '86. I deal in VA repos mainly. You know, I'm getting kind of high mileage, and I don't get out and fight like I used to when I owned Century 21 and Coldwell Banker. I've sent solos off, and I'm kind of retracting back a little bit. But I've still got that urge to do stuff, so I handle VA repo. I just got assigned 3 VA repos. They were all big houses, 27 to 3,800 square feet. You know, this one that I've got here in North Pole has got a 2 wood pellet stoves in it. It's got an oil boiler. And I can tell you, I'll bet, the reason they left is the cost of heating that building was horrific. And that's not right. You know, they've got the right to heat it with wood pellets. In fact, for a while, the last 6 months, 8 months, wood pellets was more expensive than oil. Not a lot of people knew that. But the only thing we're going to get is gas. And we've got to get gas here, but we're not going to do it. Now, Mike Prax was right when he said you got to go down and testify at the assembly. Sam Tuck was right when you got to go vote for the right people. The assembly is not defending your rights, and that is their job. You need to get those assembly members motivated to defend your rights, to go against the EPA, to go against DEC, and let's get this thing done right where it's fair and equitable to everybody in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Burr Assembly right now is your worst enemy for your rights. They're the only ones who are taking the time to find out who you are, if you're an offender for burning wood, and they're reporting you. It's not the EPA, it's not the DEC. And so anyway, with that, I would like to introduce the candidate for State House for District 4, Jim Sackett, who is running against Gutenberg, and we will get him to win. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I love Alaska, and I think you probably do too, or you would be here tonight getting involved. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Ever thought about what that means? It means they're unquestionable and beyond debate, yet here we are, 242 years later, having them questioned. We've come a long way from getting upset over a 3% beverage tax, and so upset that we took to arms. Did you know that in Minnesota, California, and New York, the tax rate is nearly 50% on you? I'd like to envision Alaska that never gets like that. And the only thing keeping our state from becoming like that is our Senate. Our current governor and our House are bloating up the budget like a dead caribou. You know what a bloated budget and a dead caribou have in common? They both stink. The bottom line is you don't need the government taking your hard-earned money, skimming off their portion for bureaucracy, and using the balance of those funds to regulate you. I want to tell you a story about splunking. You guys know what splunking is? When you go into caves and tunnels under the earth and you crawl around in there. Well, I have a cousin who was a Marine sergeant. And he had a couple buddies, and they had a weekend off, and they said, let's go splunking, see what that's like. Look at some of those old World War II tunnels. They got their headlamps, and we're all excited, and they get down in there, and they're going through these caves and seeing all kinds of neat stuff, and it's kind of getting smaller and smaller as they go in, and they came to a igloo-sized cavern, probably 6 feet in circumference and about 4 feet tall, and there was a little 3-foot tunnel that went on. They were all excited to see where this tunnel went. So they got on their hands and knees, and they started crawling in there. Well, they didn't crawl for very long, and that tunnel started closing in like this. Started getting a little shorter, and pretty soon they had to come off their hands and knees. They had to do a belly crawl, but these guys were Marines. They know how to do a belly crawl. They're going along in there, and eventually this tunnel starts to get a little angle to it, going down. They're not sure what it's going to break out into. But they've got their arms out in front of them, and they're crawling along, and it keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and you know, shorter on the side, and pretty soon the front guy realizes he's stuck. He's like, I can't go forward anymore. It's getting too small. We got to back out. Well, because of the angle of the splunking, the guy in the back with his hands in front of him, he couldn't back up. And he said, I can't back up. And the claustrophobia set in and the panic set in, and for about 20 minutes it was sheer mayhem. It's like we're down here on this angle and we're stuck down in this thing and we're going to die here. You know, and they kind of had to get themselves under control. And when they figured out how to work like a team, the front guy put his feet on the second guy's shoulder, and the back guy was able to take his hands and push off his feet just enough to gain a couple inches. And then he would wedge his legs against the side of the little cave there, and he'd grab the ankles on the middle guy and pull him back about 2 inches, and then hold him there, and that guy would reach up and grab the front guy and pull him back. Well, it took them about 2 hours to get out of an area that took them 15 minutes to get into, but working together, they were able to get back out of there. Well, why do I tell you a story about splunking? Because I think that our freedoms are getting splunked right now. We're seeing that cave get tighter and tighter and closing in on us more and more. And all of a sudden, you look around, you realize we're stuck. How do we get here? You know, we were having fun a little bit ago, and now we're stuck. So what's the moral of the story? Moral of the story is you got to stop crawling down that hole before you get stuck, and turn around and get out while you can. And we need to do that with our freedoms. I think we have an opportunity to correct a republic that is adrift. I care deeply about Alaska and maintaining an Alaska that offers a place of the greatest freedom. We need a place where people like you and I can express our freedoms without fear that the impending hand of government regulations is on top of us. And your freedom rests in your elected officials. You've got to choose wisely. And right now, at the federal level, there are legislators trying to remove your Second Amendment. And they're using the tragedy of school shootings to champion the idea that somehow guns and the NRA are to blame. That's paramount to blaming ARP for old people dying. Really no connection at all. We aren't banning cars when a drunk driver kills someone, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's not expedient to the liberal agenda for disarming America. Of course, realize that every freedom we have hangs on the Second Amendment. We have the First Amendment protected by the Second Amendment because the Second Amendment gives it teeth. The next time a liberal person comes up to you and says, hey, I want to talk to you about changing the Second Amendment or getting rid of it, you need to remind them that you only have that ability to give me your opinion because I have a gun, because I give teeth to that. Because our founding fathers knew that as government grew, kind of like a cancer feeding on itself, that the first thing they would want to take away when they got to a certain size is your First Amendment. That's why they created the Second Amendment, to protect the First. And if you're not concerned about the continuous erosion of freedoms, you haven't been paying attention. You're getting wedged down into that hole of a tunnel, and soon you aren't going to be able to move. You need representatives that will serve you and not rule you. As your representative, I will defend your freedoms. The Constitution to me is non-negotiable. That's not on the table. I'm with Sam on that. We need to have some regulatory restraint. We don't need more rules, and when we do make rules, we don't want to make rules to the lowest common denominator. Every time some knucklehead goes and does something, get a new law that binds us all to the level that protects the knucklehead. I think when we do have laws, we got to have good legislation. We do need to develop our natural resources. That's absolutely necessary for good paying jobs, reverse the out-migration of people from Alaska, turn our economy around, fund things like education. I don't know about you guys, but I want my domestic tranquility back. You guys remember what domestic tranquility is? Back in 7th grade in social studies class, when you had to read the preamble to the Constitution, it said domestic tranquility, the ability to live a quiet, peaceful life without government. I don't feel like I have domestic tranquility right now. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I'm a lifelong Fairbanksan. And I want you to send me to Juneau to help correct a course, public adrift. Remember, every time the government passes a regulation, it takes a freedom. You can't put a price tag on losing freedoms. Your liberties are being violated without so much as a "I'm sorry." Our government is unapologetic about their theft of your liberty. Once a freedom's been taken, it's really hard to get it back. When you realize it's gone forever and might never come back, you will grieve for future Americans that they'll never see the America that our grandparents saw. Currently, Tammy Wilson and Steve Thompson's votes are canceled out by Dave Guttenberg's and Scott Kawasaki's. So our interior delegation can't make any headway because they're just down there butting heads. But I want to encourage you to vote for Bart LeBon in District 1, for me in District 4, and get 4 delegates all pulling in the same direction for the interior. Make some progress here in Fairbanks. I'll close with this. While we hold these truths to be self-evident, apparently they're not to everyone. Because you don't tell the people who live in the coldest city in the United States of America and have the highest energy costs in the United States of America, you can't burn wood. That's like telling people in South Texas, you can't use your air conditioner. Don't make any sense at all. You need to elect representation in 2018 that isn't going to look for ways to restrict your freedom. Because every time you pass a new law, you lose a freedom. And there are places in the United States where you can live if you want that kind of restriction. I have a brother-in-law in Florida who lived in a subdivision, and they had a rule you couldn't park a pickup in your driveway. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's where we'll get if we're not careful. You can't park a pickup in your yard? Wait a minute, this is Alaska. Yeah, but that's the way we did it where I came from. Moses chiseled into 2 tablets all the rules that we need. This is 1 year's worth of legislation in Alaska. We've been a state for what, 59 years? You stack that up, just in the state of Alaska, that's a lot of rules. Now you add on to that 242 years of federal rules, I bet it would touch the ceiling up there. All those things, each one of those restricting some kind of freedom that we have. That's 1 year's worth. Folks, we're in a hole, and we are crawling down, and that hole is getting tight, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And if we don't turn back, we're going to get wedged in. We got to turn this state around by electing a new governor like Scott Hawkins. Scott's going to be talking to you here a little later tonight. Scott's going to be at the pump house tomorrow night at 4 o'clock, too, if you want to interact with him. I'm going to have my campaign kickoff party on March 29th at Dog Mushers Hall on Farmers Loop from 5 to 7, and I hope you can make it. And I'm going to leave you with this. Jeremy Price from the Americans for Prosperity is going to speaker. God created all men, and Bolt made him.
So of course, everybody, talks about taxes and reducing them and things like that. So I was just curious if you had any specifics. One, if you could, what's the number 1 tax you'd like to get rid of? And 2, or if you can answer either, what kind of policies about taxes would you like to change that would reduce the overall, the reasons why we're taxed and what they collect the money for?
Well, in a perfect world, we would start at the federal level with those taxes and use them. We have taxes at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. A lot of things too, and you add all those up, that's how I got to the 50% in those states that I listed. What I'd like to do, rather than looking at the taxes that we could remove, is make sure that we don't get new ones on top of what we have. We're going into that tight hole that restricts our freedoms, but that same hole is we're running out of money too at the state level. We've got just enough left in our CBR to fund it. That's a drastic change. Start with cutting expenses, or we're going to with state income tax, kind of flat tax or tax. Anybody wants to see. I'm definitely against tax and spend. I'd much rather see us live with. Everybody in this room on an individual level doesn't write a $1,000 check when they only got $500 in the bank. But when we get together collectively at the government level, we lose that mentality. Start writing checks for money that we don't have. Well, for me, it would be our Medicaid expense. We got 196,000 people in the state of Alaska, 735,000 people. It's right up there with education, our 2 biggest expenses. Got to figure out. We're so spread out. Education's really costly. Put a full school. staff, that's expensive, just for the people to live. I don't know if that means consolidating schools into Bethel and Nome, getting some of those smaller villages to attend there, if we can consolidate that way. I haven't really looked at a lot of plans like that, but I know Medicaid for sure.
Jim, you said you were a teacher. I don't know if you said that tonight, but you said that this afternoon.
At lunch, yep.
Anyway, so what do you know of any alternatives, or have you thought of any alternatives that would help reduce the risk of not just these mass shootings, but violence in general in school? You've been there and...
Well, when I was a school teacher, we actually asked our school board if we could have guns, because when the school shootings were starting, my superintendent was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, National Guard on a weekend. We went to him first, a couple of school teachers that do a lot of shooting, and we said, why don't we get the handprint safes in our room that we've got a revolver and a pistol in that the kids can't get into because it's going to take your fingerprint to get that out. And we'll have those, and all you got to do is hear a gunshot or make that announcement that we're on lockdown. We'll have 4 or 5 teachers that train regular together. You'll lock down this school, and we'll leave our rooms and go looking for the shooter. And they wouldn't let us do that. But we were convinced that that was the trick. You know, we put armed guards on our money, we put armed guards on our president, but we put and I keep seeing a lot of posts that teachers they don't know how to use guns. You know, they want to teach kids and this and that. We were begging as teachers, me and 3 or 4 other guys, let us have a gun in our room. If anything ever happens in the school, we're ready. One of them was a retired police officer, and he was going to take us through the drills. I was convinced that that was the answer. But we got so much pushback from the political school board that said no. What if a kid got a hold of it? He's going to have to break my arm off first and put it on there, but I guess that's a possibility. But if he does, the other 4 teachers are going to shoot him, so we're good.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just say a word on that really this not allowing teachers to have guns in the classroom because you're concerned for your kids is a false narrative, because you're already trusting the teachers with your kids, you know, to take care of your children's lives. So you're already putting your trust in them. And so anyway, when I taught at a private school, we actually did have guns, or at least the principal did, so we felt pretty safe. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Jeremy Price, Americans for Prosperity, Alaska Division. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? On that note, actually, the Republican State Convention was last week. I can't remember if I was talking with Scott or Jim or somebody else, but there's a friend of ours that's an Alaska Airlines pilot, and he says that's similar to what they've got there. We just duplicate what they already do in the FAA. Planes, you know, you can't carry a gun on planes, but they've got lock boxes in the cockpits that the pilots have access to. They train on the same firearm, so they know how to use the gun. It's there if they need to use it. It's something we could duplicate in the schools as well. If you've never heard of Americans for Prosperity, we're basically a free market advocacy group. What we try and do is help Alaskans live better lives by removing barriers to opportunity. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it can mean a lot of different things, but generally we think that less regulation is good, less government is good, spending should be always kept in check, and the power of the individual is self, not government. So I'm based at Anchorage. We've got offices in Anchorage and in the Valley. We're headquartered out of D.C., Arlington, Virginia, and we've got about 36, 37 state chapters across the country. And so we work on local, state, and federal issues. On the federal side, we fought for tax reform in Congress. Local in Anchorage, we fought to restore the tax cap when the Mayor Berkowitz at the time tried to gut it, and we ran a ballot initiative to restore it and put it in the city charter. So those are kind of the things we do. I wanted to just kind of talk a bit about Myself, right now I'm a young parent. I'm a parent of 3 kids: Sienna, Alexa, Lincoln. 7, 5, and 1. Lincoln, yes, President Lincoln. I figured, we start them off right. So we'll see what happens. But if you all have had young kids at one time, you're like me. My wife and I, it's pretty good, life. Our kids are really well behaved. They're good kids. They do what we say. They respect each other. They play well during the day. Then comes the bedtime routine. The bedtime routine is terrible. So the bedtime routine in the Price household usually lasts about an hour. It's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. By the 5th time I've asked Sienna to brush her teeth, she literally makes a hissing noise. She sounds like a possessed cat. She'll hiss at me. So throughout the day, we want to pat them on the back and say, "Great job today, good job, guys." And then by evening time, you're ready to strangle them before you put them to bed. So there's this tug and push and pull kind of situation. That's what I think about when I think of the legislature. I go to Juneau a lot these days, and when I roam the halls of the Capitol building, I have that same sense where sometimes the legislature does something really good, you want to pat them on the back. The next week, they do something so terrible, you just want to bang your head against the wall. So, on the positive end, what is our legislature doing right? Senator Pete Kelly's actually been pretty good with saying no new taxes. And he's held the line on that, no new taxes. The governor's tried to introduce every tax in the book, and he's said no. I got to applaud him for that. State spending cap. We've been pushing for a state spending cap for the last 2 years. They've made it a signature issue in the state Senate. We applaud them for it. Medicaid expansion. The legislature didn't enact expansion. I don't know if you guys even know what Medicaid expansion is. I'll touch base on that here in a few minutes. But the legislature actually never even brought that thing up for a vote. The governor unilaterally expanded Medicaid. That was under the Obamacare law, a big expansion of the government. So those are some good things. If you're young, I don't know, probably nobody uses Uber here. Does anybody use Uber here? Probably, okay, a little bit. All right. So rideshare is good, especially if you're a young person. You don't want to take a nasty old smelly taxi cab. They passed a law that allows these businesses to come to Alaska. They've been in every other state in the country except Alaska until last year. So, good job. What are they doing wrong? Now, we could all probably pass around a hat and come up with some really good ideas of what they're doing wrong. But off the top of my head, on Medicaid expansion, they could have killed that thing immediately. So what Medicaid expansion is, Representative Sackett said recently, the soon-to-be Representative Sackett, the legislature took Medicaid and basically expanded it to roughly 42,000 people. Medicaid has always been for people who couldn't take care of themselves. The poor, the blind, the indigent, parents who were poor who had kids. So the kids would qualify for Medicaid. When Obamacare was passed, the government, the Democratic Congress and President Obama wanted to run a single-payer socialized medicine down Americans' throats. The problem with that is they didn't have enough votes in the Senate. They did in the House. So they had to just settle with whatever the Senate came up with. The path to socialized medicine and single-payer government health care was Medicaid. Since they couldn't do a single-payer system, they just ran tens of millions of Americans into the Medicaid system. And that wasn't even an option. That was a requirement that states had to expand Medicaid. Then the Supreme Court, if you recall, a short time later said, no, you've overstepped your authority. States can't be coerced into Medicaid expansion. So it became an option. Our state expanded it unilaterally. So as Jim said, we've got roughly a third of the state on Medicaid. The legislature didn't have to fund the administrative costs, meaning they didn't have to say, hey, here's the state money, the state portion to fund this program. They could have killed it immediately. They didn't. They haven't held the line really on spending. They've cut the budget, but most of that is capital spending. From 2003 to 2013, the budget roughly went from 3 and change billion, 3.2, 3.3 billion in 2003 up to 7.3, 7.4 billion by 2013. So that's more than doubling the level of spending. Now, they've cut spending since then, but again, most of that is capital spending, which at some point has to come back. What else are they doing wrong? Regulation nation. Every board that goes before the legislature and says, we need to increase the training or the requirements to get license A, the legislature just swallows hook, line, and sinker. It doesn't matter what the profession is, what the license is. If a board comes to the legislature and says, we need to raise the requirements, the legislature does it every time. So it's harder and harder to start a small business. It's harder and harder to make a living. That's wrong. That's not the American way. We should be lowering the barriers of opportunity. We should be making it easier to start a business. I had the fortune of being in the lobby and having a conversation with Mike Rowe. If you guys haven't heard of Mike Rowe, he's a great public speaker and champion for the little guy. And he was telling me the story about hair braiding. And he said, you know, in a lot of these states, if you want to be a hair braider, you need a cosmetology license, which is 1,000 hours of training just to be licensed to braid hair. Well, so I looked at Alaska. It's actually 1,300 hours in Alaska to braid hair. So we made that our mission. We said, all right, we're gonna fight for these hair braiders, all 30 of them in Anchorage, and we're gonna lower the regulations for these hair braiders, right? So went down to Juneau, lobbied for these hair braiders. We said, these mostly women, African American, are practicing illegally. So they're running a business out of their house without a license. If they're caught or somebody rats them out, they're going to get fined. And they're going to have a criminal record because they wanted to braid hair as a business. So a couple guys said, okay, we'll help you out. So there's a bill, Senate Bill 4, passed the Senate, it's in the House, that drops the requirement for braiding hair from 1,300 hours to 35 hours. I said, okay, I wanted 0 hours, but that's the best we could do. Then the House is tweaking the bill, changing the bill, making adjustments to it. We hope it survives, but this is an issue that we think, we can all get behind. We all want people to have an easier time starting a business and being successful. So let's talk about spending cap. This is something we've been pushing for a couple years now. The state Senate has 2 bills. One bill is a statutory spending cap. The other bill is constitutional spending cap. What's the difference? The statutory spending cap is basically where the state legislature sets a limit on the amount that they can spend every year. However, they can circumvent that limit by just voting to suspend it. In fact, Congress just did that. If you recall, Congress set a Budget Control Act, a limit on spending. 2 years later, they blew past it. So it's good, but it's not great. What we really prefer is the constitutional amendment. Does anybody know about the existing spending cap in our state constitution? Okay, some of us knew we have it. I didn't even know we had one until a few years ago. But it came into play in 1982. In 1982, Governor Jay Hammond said, we are spending like crazy, we need a spending cap. The legislature agreed. So in 82, we imposed a spending cap by a vote of the people. The legislature passed it, went to Alaska voters, and we passed it in 82. It was set at a limit of $2.5 billion in 82. So adjusting for inflation and population growth, which was allowed by statute, in today's dollars, that'd be roughly $10 billion. So that's why it hasn't worked. It was set so high, we've come close twice in hitting that, but it's so high it's ineffective. It doesn't control spending, but it is popular. In 1986, we had a vote again. So basically, when we passed this in 82, there was kind of a get-out clause that said we'd vote on it again 4 years from now. If people don't want it, we can get out of it, and if people want it, we'll keep it. So in 86, we voted on it again. 70% of Alaskans voted to keep the spending cap in place. That coincides with a recent poll that was done last year by Dittman Research out of Anchorage, statewide poll that found that roughly 65% of Alaskans support a spending cap. So it doesn't matter if it's 1986 or 2018, most Alaskans want to constrain spending. And if a spending cap had been in place that actually worked, meaning it was based on last year's budget and adjusted only for inflation, we'd have saved billions of dollars. I've actually got some bar charts here. I'm starting to feel like Mitt Romney, so I'm going to pass these things out. But if you would like some bar charts, I've got them. It will tell you how much money we'd save if we had a spending cap in place, and what the spending cap looks like within our state constitution. But that's good public policy. Alaskans want it. We want to see it. But here's the problem. Here's the wrinkle. When this was up for a hearing last week, In the state, Senate State Affairs Committee, I testified in support of it, and I think 3 people testified in support of it from the Valley. So my plea to everybody in this room and everybody that I come in contact with is, if we want good public policy passed, we got to put the pressure on the legislature. We got to herd these cats to help them do the right thing. If you take the analogy back to my kids, what I found that is most successful is if I'm with them the whole time. If I help them change into their pajamas, if I help them brush their teeth, if I'm there side by side, they do what's right. They get it done, right? The same thing goes for the legislature. If we don't talk to them at all, they're not going to stay the course. We need consistent attention. We need to call them, we need to email them, send them messages on Facebook, even when they do something right. If we just complain when they do something wrong, they're not going to listen to us. So, my pitch, my plea today is hit up your legislators. Let them know when they're doing something right. Let them know when they're doing something wrong. And that's the key to getting good public policy passed. Otherwise, the state's going to be going in the wrong direction. We'll take 3 steps forward in the right direction, and we'll take 3 steps back. So, if you're interested in getting more engaged, you won't need some help, feel free to come see us. My name's Jeremy Price. I've got a couple staff members that help us out in the Anchorage and Valley area. We have come to Fairbanks and have hosted events. So if you think there's an issue that we ought to highlight or we ought to work on, let us know. We're happy to come to Fairbanks and travel around the state and do what we can to help. But that's overarching idea behind Americans for Prosperity is we want to help Alaskans live better lives by lowering barriers to opportunity. So getting the government out of the way. And that's it. Thanks for the time.
For you real quick, Jeremy.
Okay.
So recently I heard something about an initiative or something like that about Save the Salmon. And speaking to some miners, it's under the guise of protecting the salmon, but the miners said it was essentially shut down mining in Alaska. So I was hoping that you knew something about it and what can be done.
Yeah, it's a ballot issue that was started by the extreme environmental NGO groups that are trying to stop development of resources, oil, gas, mining. Problem is that would also include construction of roadways. It just adds a layer of bureaucracy or a layer of regulation when you impact a stream, a water body, a river, anything that could have fish habitat. You'd have this greater permit hurdle to get through. And the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, there are so many federal laws that regulate this already. You don't need more. The fish are protected. In fact, the Clean Water Act guarantees, even if the Corps of Engineers wants to permit a bridge or a road or a port, they have to get approval from EPA. EPA has veto authority. So trust me, this stuff is heavily regulated. You don't need more.
Okay, and then one more thing about actually the salmon being able to fish them. I've heard from people who go into the villages that the commercial fishermen essentially reach their quota, take out 30,000 fish or whatever they get to, and then hardly anything is left for the locals. And so I didn't know, is it Alaskans first, or is it, Canadians or these other commercials that come through and take over? What's the status on that?
So I'm not going to, I don't step into that one. That is a long-standing fight between commercial guys, sport guys, and so I'm not an expert on the issue.
Okay, so you don't
It's
get
not
that
something we've got into. I'm sure there's probably somebody else. Actually, save that question for Scott. He's probably the person to ask for that one. Mike, hey, Mike.
I'd like you to expound a little bit. You say that you've been to Juneau, spent some time down there while the legislature's in session. I haven't. I don't go down to the Chevy dealership and tell them how much I don't like Chevys. I go to the Ford dealership if I want a Ford. So it's an unnatural act for citizens to say they don't want something. But just a little more experience. You can send them an email, you can call them. If you call them, I assume they're busy. What are we supposed to assume when we try and contact them, and what do you think is steps that we could take, practical steps?
Well, the first thing I'd say is if you're not, somebody else is. That was the biggest shocker for me. When I went down to Juneau, there's actually a lot of people down there with their hands out asking for things. So it's kind of an isolated bubble, and you'll see the regular folks. I'd say there's probably 40 to 50 lobbyists who just live there during session, and they make a lot of money sitting in those chairs in the hallway, hitting up legislators on a regular basis. So some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some, it just kind of depends on perspective. But so what I wanted to say, I guess, is someone is already there doing it, so they need to hear the other side of the argument. That's what we keep on finding out is unless we provide another perspective on the issue, they're just in an echo chamber. So it's kind of tough, I get it, but Facebook has changed the game on this. People are pretty well informed now with Facebook, but the best thing to do really is weigh in, and it's the most time-consuming thing to do, is weigh in during some of these hearings. When there's a public comment period, that's the best time to weigh in, because then you're putting your voice on record. You can even look it up. You'll have if you shoot them an email and you say, I want this included in the hearing, then you can look up the hearing record and your comments will be there. All the opposition, all the supporting statements, all the groups, the trade associations, the interest groups that support or oppose, that's all there. So as a regular grassroots person, and we can help you navigate the schedule and help you get, call in at the right time or send emails to the right email address. We can help do that. But that's what you want to do. Find out when the hearings are coming up on the bills that are going to, be good or bad, and weigh in on those hearings. That's the most effective way to do it.
And do you have to go down to the legislative office?
Nope, you can. It's nice to go to the LIO, your local legislative information office, but you don't have to. You can just call a free 1-800 number and you'll get connected into the hearing, and so you can listen to the comments, and then you'll be told when your comment comes up. The chairman will just say, now we're going to hear from Jeremy Price or Mike Prax. What do you have to say about the bill? Well, I think it sucks, and here's why. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And you don't really need to know. People think, oh, I need to know this issues frontwards, backwards. No, you really don't. All you got to do is provide your own perspective. I'm a small business owner, and this is my perspective. This is what I see. Or, you know what, I'm not an expert on the issue, but this is what I think is most appropriate. And that carries a lot of weight. Carries a lot of weight. You don't have to be an expert. You just need a voice.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, and now Scott Hawkins, candidate for governor, will speak to us. And, I don't know about you, but I'm hoping for a governor who will say no to these special interest groups, unless it's mine.
Christine, I have one. It's great to be with you here today. I've been coming up and visiting the interior pretty much the whole time that I've lived in Alaska, which is about a little over 35 years now. I came up as originally to help a relative finish a house. I'd worked my way through college as a finish carpenter. He bought an unfinished house, so what the heck, come spend a summer in Alaska. And I did, and I caught the bug. And then about a year and a half later, I had the opportunity to come back and take a really good professional job, and the rest has been history. I will talk just a little bit about my background, and I'll talk about the policy agenda that I intend to bring to Juneau, and why I'm perhaps unusually qualified to shake up Juneau. And Juneau does need to be shaken up, just as the borough here needs to be shaken up. And I've got some ideas about them. So I mentioned I'm a 35-year Alaskan. I'm also a husband of 26 years. I met my wife 27 years ago on an airplane between here and Japan, back when we still had direct service. So for you romantics in the room, those sorts of things do happen. My wife Toyoko and I have a daughter, Lisa, who's 23 years old. She's an accomplished vocalist, and she'd love to be able to find work back in her home state. In terms of professional qualifications, I'm a private sector sort of a guy. I've never worked a day in government in my entire life. And the way it looks, well, unless I happen to be governor, I guess I'll work a day in government, but I suppose that'll be a little different. Kind of be in charge of making some changes rather than just kind of being a cog in the machine. But very much from the private sector. When I did come back up here in '83, after my summer up here, I came up as a bank economist. I was hired to open an economic research department at a mid-sized bank, and it was a great opportunity for me. I was able to dive in and learn all about the industries that make this state tick, and the regions, and what are the important industries to the different regions of the state. I learned about the unusual role the state government plays in the economy here in Alaska. It was all very, very good. Really enjoyed that job for a number of years. And then in the late 80s, the economy went into the tank. And at the ripe old age of 28, I was named to head up the newly formed Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. And I remember coming into work on the first day of work, and there was a yellow pad on my desk with a pencil. It was blank, and it was, okay, create a program, move the needle, make a difference, generate some jobs, help us turn around this bad situation. And we did. And if we have time, I'll touch on that a little bit more. And then, after doing that for a number of years, about 8 years, I transitioned into an entrepreneurial phase in business, where I've been ever since. Co-founded, continue to co-manage 2 long-standing Alaska businesses. One is an international tour company that brings in mainly groups of Japanese tourists, a lot of them bound for the interior. And the other is a supply chain management company, employs about 200 people, and we organize all the goods and widgets and equipment and all the things it takes to operate natural resource development projects in remote areas. We're kind of the materials and equipment gurus that work on behalf of the customer. So I'm very proud to employ roughly 200 Alaskans in good jobs, jobs that pay well, jobs that have a future, jobs that have benefits, and jobs that we just have to think of. We have to think every year, how do we continue to provide these health insurance benefits, and how do we continue to stay abreast of all of the regs and all of the things that you have to contend with, particularly when you're a larger employer of over 50 people. It's just mind-boggling. Well, the common denominator throughout my career is that I've been a creator of businesses, a creator of programs. I've been a founder. I've been an innovator. My businesses both involved in innovation. They both involved ways of using the internet in their respective industries that hadn't really been common in the past in Alaska. A problem solver and a team builder. That's really, when I look back, that's how I kind of see my career, is what I've done to differentiate. And I've done the same thing in the political arena. I like to say that by day I'm a mild-mannered businessman, but I work overtime trying to keep the state safe for private enterprise and jobs. What I've done is a couple of things. One is I've some years ago, 8 years ago now, stood up an organization called the Accountability Project. It's a great organization. It's an independent expenditure group. We raise money and we spend money on behalf of candidates that we think are good for the private sector, good for jobs, and basically just bring good conservative value. We've run about 15 legislative campaigns. And independent expenditure, the only rule is you have to be independent from the campaign. You can't give money to the campaign. You can't go compare strategy or anything like that. You have to do your own thing completely on your own. But we've done that about 15 times and have moved the needle. In 2012, we were successful in flipping the Senate from basically Democrat control. And last year around, we successfully defended 2 key Senate seats to keep the Senate from flipping back. And had we not been around to do that, we'd be looking at a very different Senate today. We wouldn't have that firewall. It's been preventing a lot of the worst nonsense in Juneau from becoming. Another thing I did was created what's called the Alaska Business Report Card. And that's a report card that grades legislators on their performance as it pertains to business and economic development. We give them A through F grades. We don't just make it up. We track for every bill that is moving through the legislature or even introduced, we track that is of importance to business or economic, private sector economy. We track that bill. And We score legislators on every little single step that that bill takes through the legislature, whether it's a committee vote, whether it's a floor speech they make that shows some leadership, whether it's a floor vote, whether it's a vote on amendments. We tally up. By the end of the two-year legislature, we end up with about 6,000 to 10,000 performance records on our 60 legislators. We grade those top to bottom, and we give happy to say, partly because of the business report card, there's a nice big fat group of A's and B pluses at the top. This isn't going to surprise you either. There's a pretty good fat group of F's down at the bottom. And we're not shy about giving those out. But I'll tell you what, that has really moved the policy needle in Juneau. Legislators either love that report card if they're on that upper end of the grading curve, or they fear it if they're on the bottom end of the grading curve, because the Accountability Project is not afraid to mail those grades into the mailboxes of constituents around election time. So those are some of the things I've done in the public sector, and I know what I've learned in Alaska is that we're a small state, and if you want to make a difference up here, you just need to stand up and get involved. This is a place, the thing I love about this state is that this is a place that you can move the needle. You can make a difference here. The people that are gathered in this room tonight are here to make a difference. And you can make a difference, and you will make a difference on this issue, I'm convinced. And I'll talk a bit about that here in a bit. But my top priorities on the campaign, the things that I want to talk the most about and put the most focus on when I get to Juneau, first of all, is arresting the crime wave. I know that's kind of a cute phrase, but that's what we need to do. We need to arrest that crime wave. I know Fairbanks hasn't seen it quite as badly as Anchorage, but it is crazy. Most population centers around the state have seen a big spike in crime, and there's really one prime cause of it. And the good news is it's self-inflicted, so that means we can overturn it. It's called Senate Bill 91. And that's introduced the so-called catch and release policy for criminals. It took many nonviolent criminals, nonviolent crimes, most nonviolent crimes, and essentially removed any effective consequences for those crimes. And oh my goodness, who could have seen this coming? Crime spiked, especially those nonviolent crimes. And if you're familiar with the broken windows theory of policing, it starts with the little stuff, and then it goes to the big stuff, and then it goes to the bigger stuff, and pretty soon, Anchorage has got a murder rate that's higher than we've had in ever. Right. There's similar trends going on. So we need to basically throw out Senate Bill 91 and start over. Now, that doesn't mean we go back, we lurch back the other way and go back to high incarceration rates. The one valid driver behind Senate Bill 91 is that we were incarcerating too many young men, primarily. When people go into prison as a non-hardened criminal, maybe a first or second time offender, they seldom come out better people than when they went in. And so that's our recidivism rates. People offend once they get out of prison are terrible here in Alaska. Our prison system is very dysfunctional. And so the idea was there's got to be a better way. And there is a better way. But that better way is not to repeal the penalties and have a catch and release policy and a slap on the wrist. Not a very hard slap on the wrist either. So we need to bring back serious consequences in this state for all crimes. And we can do that without throwing everybody in jail and having to pay for 3 hots and a cot for 2 years. We can use heavy fines. We can use community service. We can use more home confinement. We can suspend dividend privileges for repeat offenders. That'll get their attention. There's all kinds of innovative things that we can do to really make crime hurt. And we should do that. And I think we can do it in such a way, particularly with the community service and teaching people, okay, you can't pay your $10,000 fine. Well, guess what? We have a community service opportunity for you. You show up for work 20 hours a week, whatever makes sense for the crime. And we're going to show you how to work. And we're going to require that you work. And you're going to, at the end of the day, go home feeling the dignity of work. And that, friends and neighbors, could actually make criminals a better people at the end of their sentences. So I firmly believe that's how we need to be thinking about arresting this crime wave. But what we have to remember is that we've got the largest state government in the United States per capita. We spend $16,000 per head, man, woman, and child, state government in the state of Alaska. Take a guess what the state of California spends. There are no pikers. Around $6,000. We are hands down number one. There's not even a particularly close second. The national average is about 5,500. So we're over triple the national average. That's how big it is. And yet, the most essential function of government, the one thing that government should do before it can do anything else, is protect the public safety. So we have got the largest state government in the nation, and we can't even do public safety right. What's wrong with that picture? That's what we have to get back to and realize that even if we have to shift some priorities, even if we have to put a little bit more money into opioid treatment, even if we have to look at our staffing levels and some other things in our public safety department, we might have to shift those priorities, because public safety is the number one deliverable of government. If you can't do that, you're not functioning properly as a government. The second thing we need to do is get our fiscal house in order. We have been burning through our state savings at a terrible clip. We're just about out. When we entered this oil price downturn, we had about $12 billion in the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund, which is kind of our rainy day fund. Well, guess what we have now? Just a little over $2 billion. And guess what else? The job of trimming down, the serious of trimming down the size of government really hasn't even started, as we've been burning through that. It's not like we've been trying hard to tighten our belt and we still haven't been able to stem the tide. That's not it at all. It's that we haven't even seriously tried to cut the budget. If you take the 16 state operating agencies of the state of Alaska, everything from public safety and corrections down through education and health and social services, those 16 agencies compared to several years ago are down in total about 3%. That's it. 3%. Now, there's been shifts within those. Some have been cut, some have been increased, but you add them all up together, and it's pretty negligible what we've been able to accomplish on the cut side, and that's on the operating budget. Now, we've been willing to make the cowardly cuts, and they're not even cuts. I'm referring to the operating budget. I'm sorry, I'm referring to the operating budget that hasn't been cut. I'm referring to the capital budget that has been cut. The capital budget, that's not a cut. If you don't have a lot of excess cash around to fund every project that somebody wants to do, then you don't have the cash and you can't fund the project. That's not a cut. I'm sorry. But that's the only place that we've been able to manage to reduce spending. And it's hurt our construction industry terrible. We've gone too far in that direction. We've gone from nearly a $3 billion capital budget down to one that's barely $200 million, that just barely meets the federal match for certain projects. And guess what? We've lost a lot of high-paying jobs as a result, and we're seeing that ripple through our economy. So we need to get our fiscal house in order, and that starts with trimming government down to size. And as I said, it's a job that remains largely undone. And it's a job that really only the governor can do. Now, I know that sounds like kind of a provocative statement, but legislators and legislators are not well equipped to cut budgets. You have 60 legislators down there, you're herding cats, you're trying to get enough votes to get a budget passed in the House and get a budget passed in the Senate, and then the differences are ironed out in conference committee, and it never goes down in conference committee, I can guarantee you, and then the legislature passes out a budget. Well, that is not an architecture that is designed for fiscal restraint. And there's a reason in the state constitution that our governor is such a powerful executive, because it was understood that it was going to have to fall to the governor's office to put the brakes on and bring spending under control. The only problem is I can't think of a governor in our history that's really ever been serious about that. I mean, maybe you can. Maybe you can enlighten me, but when I look back on all the previous governors, I can't remember a single governor that said, you know what, we've got to get this 900-pound gorilla trimmed down to size. Because we've been the highest spending state in the U.S. since the late 1970s. We're coming up on 40-year birthday of having that distinction of being the largest state government in the U.S. So it takes a governor. It takes a governor to say, okay, Friends, ladies and gentlemen of the legislature, this year, we're going to step the budget down by $250 million in the general fund operating budget. And here are my ideas how to do it. You may have some other ideas how to do it, but this is what we're going to do. Because every penny that you appropriate over and above that $250 reduction is going to get vetoed by me. So if you want me to decide the priorities, and decide which of your programs I'm going to veto, you just go ahead and exceed the line that I've drawn here in terms of the maximum that we're going to spend. And I'll make those decisions, or you can make the decisions yourself. And I don't know exactly how that would play out. I have a feeling that there'd probably still be kind of like kids in a class. Jim knows this. They'll try to test it and see if you're really serious. But I think it'd probably take a couple of years of the governor coming back and actually making good on that. Right? It's not going to be more than $4.1 billion in the operating budget this year, and here are my vetoes. And given our situation in this state, I believe the public would uphold those. I don't think there's a huge danger that the governor would lose control of that. The thing about it is, though, when it comes to budget cuts, you should carefully. You have to do them intelligently. You have to do them with minimal impact, real people, because the media will eat you alive. Absolutely. I was saying the other day in a different forum, recalling, this will date me. I can see some of you here might remember this. When David Stockman and Ronald Reagan tried to reclassify ketchup as a vegetable, that was the end of the Reagan budget cuts, right there. It was the ketchup. Now, Reagan never really, he was a wonderful president. Cutting the budget wasn't what he got up in the morning to do first. He had other important work to do. But that's a good example of how you'll just get your lunch handed to you if you're not really, and if you don't have a governor that's got the communication skills to say, look, we have got to get this thing down to size. And these are the best cuts with the least impact. Here's why we don't need this department. I've got a lot of ideas on where we can cut spending. One of them is that we're a state with 730-some thousand people. We have 16 cabinet-level agencies in this state. Well, that's probably, I don't know, somewhere in the 4 to 6 more than we really need. We could do some serious streamlining and consolidation. We could unexpand Medicare, or at least implement the work requirement of Medicare that's been floating around in Juneau. I think it's a great idea. Senator Pete Kelly had an article. A wonderful idea. There are a lot of things like that we can do. We can start asking our school systems, our school districts, to deliver more education and less administration. There's a thought. All kinds of things that we could do. The second thing, and Jeremy hit on it very well, and I'll just touch lightly, the hard work of getting the budget trimmed down to size. The only way that we're ever going to consolidate that and keep that lid on it for the long haul is to have a spending cap. And I'd like to see one that kind of I'd like to see one that steps spending down over a period of years. I don't know if that's too tricky to enact, but a very essential ingredient of a long-term fiscal policy that's third, very important, is we need to depoliticize the dividend. The dividend is poisoning our politics in this. Governor Walker made a terrible mistake when he stepped in and said, you know what, this has been based on a formula for the last 32 years and it's worked pretty well, but I want to stampede everybody into thinking the sky is falling and that we need a personal income tax, so I'm going to go ahead and veto this thing by half. And poof, overnight, a program that was formula-driven is now whatever the governor thinks it ought to be. Instant politicizing of the dividend program. And that was really a disappointment. It really broke the trust of the public. So we need to get back to a formula that people count on. We need to put that formula to a vote of the people so they can ratify it. And we need to settle it once and for all. Now, in my opinion, the governor doesn't get to decide everything, and this will be a big debate with the legislature and everything else, but in my opinion, we can set that dividend a lot higher than it is today. It's sitting at about $1,200 per head today. I believe we can comfortably afford a dividend at $1,600 to $2,000 per head range without backing ourselves into a financial corner where we have to start taxing ourselves in order to be able to pay one another a dividend. The day that we're taking money out of one pocket, moving it over to the other pocket, this is the income tax, this is the dividend. The day that one family is having to subsidize another one with the dividend, we don't have a dividend program anymore. We have an income transfer program. So we have to be very, very careful about that. We have to set that dividend right at that sweet spot where it really does the role for families that it's fulfilled for years in this state, but is not too greedy and so aggressive that we end up undermining it, and we end up having to turn this from a red state into a blue state. We start taxing one another in order to pay one another dividends, we've got a state Bernie Sanders is going to be pretty happy with. We can't let that happen, folks. We absolutely can't. So please hear me on this. We have got to avoid that trap. And that is a subject that this election, I think, is going to turn on more than anything else. And it's going to turn, the primary, I think, is going to be influenced by it, and the general is going to be influenced because the Democrats are all about levying a personal income tax in order to prop up, in order to forestall and avoid the cuts that we need to have and still be able to pay that dividend. Well, my plan requires us to do those cuts significantly year after year for several years, starting with about $250 to $300 million in the first year or two, and stepping down 150 or so for several years thereafter. And finally, we have put ourselves in a place, instead of having a $4.5 billion operating budget, it's general funded, that we're down in the threes, somewhere in the $3 to $3.5 billion range. I think we can get there. We can't, I said earlier, we can't get there overnight, but we need a successful governor with a lot of resolve that says, this is the fiscal policy, this is where we have to get, this is the size government that this state can actually support over the long term. That's what we need in Juneau. I am completely convinced. Now, this is actually a pretty bright scenario compared to what we were looking at, say, 3 years ago, just 2-3 years ago. It was looking pretty bleak. And two big things have changed since then. But at that point in time, it was looking like, yeah, we might have to be contemplating a statewide, broad-based statewide tax, whether it's an income tax or a sales tax. We might have to be looking at lower dividends. That, you know, maybe what Walker was doing was not so far off base, the way things looked there for a while. But two big things have changed, and our policies haven't changed to match them. One, there's been more new oil on the North Slope more discovered and confirmed in the last couple, 3 years than any time since the discovery of Prudhoe Bay. And that's a game changer. That is really exciting. I know people would love to see us diversify, love to see that we're not always talking about oil, but I'll tell you what, if you've got an industry that's paying your bills and sending you dividends and not requiring you to pay, not requiring the state government to reach its hand into your wallet all the time and take out thousands of dollars a year, you've got a pretty good thing going there. And it's something that we should keep going for as long as we can. Just those projects that are known, that have been delineated, bring those on in the next 5 years, we've got an 80% increase in production in this state, an 80% increase in the amount of oil flowing down that pipe. That's a game changer, folks. And it's very exciting. The other thing that's changed is that the permanent fund has gone on a roll in the markets. The permanent fund's a very successful corporation, and it's very well managed. And back when, here a couple, 3 years ago, it was hovering around $52 billion in total principal value, or total value overall. And it's now up in the mid-60s. That's another game changer. And it's now, if you took a percent of market value approach to it, like the big university endowments and such do, that spins off about $3.2 billion a year in revenue. That's over and above oil revenue. We could take, say, $1 billion, $1.2 billion of that, and pay a dividend that falls in the $1,600 to $2,000 range, and have plenty left over to close the budget gap, provided that we do the hard work of cutting the budget, so that there's less of a gap to fill. So we have those options. We can't have it all, as long as we don't get too greedy, as long as we don't try to, once again, weasel out of the hard work of getting that 900-pound gorilla called the operating budget whittled down to size. So we can't have it all. We really can't. And we're really a special state in that regard. There are no other states in the union that have it as good as we have, fiscally. All we have to do is just not shoot ourselves in the foot. The third thing that is vitally important to this is that we turn this economy around. We have lost thousands and thousands of. We're now down to where most of the jobs that you'll see out there available now are muck jobs, big box store retail jobs, that sort of thing. That's not how it has to be. We get these oil fields going like I'm talking about. I've got specific ideas about how we bring those into. In addition, there are probably 5 to 7 world-class mines in this state, discovered and known and have engineering done on them that we could bring into production if we had a governor that knew how to sit down and do economic development deals, knew how to build the infrastructure and keep the private sector in the lead on these projects. We need to build more state road projects, open up more areas for natural resource development. We need to have the courage to build energy projects. We've been working our gums about interior energy needs now for years and years. We need a governor that's going to say, all right, I think it's just time to build an in-state line down to the interior, and let's just get on with it. And yes, there are ways that we can finance it. We don't have the money that we used to be in a position, if we'd actually taken the bull by the horns 6, 8 years ago, we were in a position where we could have just done it. And we would have had a whole lot more to show for our capital dollars than we ended up having to show. But we can still do it. There are ways of bonding projects like that. There might be ways of getting federal infrastructure funds to help out. There's all kinds of ways that if you understand finance and understand infrastructure, you can build projects like this. It would be my intent to do so. In Southeast, we can reverse the roadless rule in the Tongass. The new governor is going to have a golden window of 2 years to work with the Trump administration to get as much traction as we can in the event that we don't get a second term from President Trump. And so we've got to make hay. We have got to make hay while the sun shines. And things like reversing the roadless rule in the Tongass, things like already we've had tremendous success with opening up some additional leasing areas out to the west in the NPRA, Alaska. So we just need to keep building on that. We need a governor that's going to engage the Trump administration, engage Secretary Zinke, and get those things done sooner rather than later. But overall, if we get our fiscal house in order, it's going to remove a lot of uncertainty in the economy. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in new investment just in the trade and service economy right now, today, sitting on the sidelines, worried about the uncertainty of our fiscal situation. So once we get that sorted out, there's going to be a big sigh of relief that just ripples across the entire state. And businesses are going to have the confidence to come out again. And we'll be able to turn this economy around, and we'll have good paying jobs in industries. And I want to make sure that Alaskans are positioned to get those jobs. I want to make sure that we've got access to the training, and we're not importing as many people as we seem to be importing now to take some of these high-paying jobs. We need to stop that. And I know you've heard me say this already, but I've got specific ideas about that. So those are the biggies. Those are the important priorities that I think we need to talk the most about. There's lots of other important priorities, like the rights of the unborn. Life is a gift from God. We need to start treating it that way. Second Amendment rights, incredibly important, especially to this state. I just wish that our friends on the left would stop exploiting every tragedy to try to roll back our gun rights. I just find it very maddening. This Florida shooting situation had nothing to do with guns. It had to do with the breakdown in the system from top to bottom. That individual, that little coward, was reported to police and to the FBI many times. It wasn't the gun. It was our institutions not doing their job. Education, I talked about getting more education and less administration. Land use access, vitally important that we make a very energetic defense of our state's rights under the Statehood Compact and under ANCSA. This administration has been far too quick to concede very important rights and set some very scary precedents out there. Now, luckily, a lot of it hasn't come to pass. But you can see where it's headed if we don't get the right kind of administration in place. We need to reform our judicial system. We have a red state population with a blue state set of judges. There's a problem with that picture. And the problem has to do with how we select judges and how we retain judges. And we need to reform that. And we need a governor that will keep we'll keep pushing nominations back to the Judicial Council until we get some good conservative nominees. It's just going to take some backbone to do that. Healthcare costs. Man, I could talk to you for a good long time about healthcare costs, and I promise I won't. But there are some specific things that we can do to get those down. We've got the highest healthcare costs in the world in this state. I'm not aware of any other political jurisdiction in the world where the costs are as high as they are. And it comes down to, really boils down to one specific thing. It boils down to our state government, together with our friends at the federal level, distorting the healthcare markets and twisting them and driving costs up. And it gets very deep and very esoteric very quick when you start talking about it, but there are solutions. We can do a much better job, distort those markets less, and bring in more competitive pressures to drive costs. So the subject that brings us together here, the rights of man tonight, another critical subject. I just never fail to marvel, never fails to amaze me, how government seems to kind of act as if it's like a force of gravity. It just continues to pull and continues to pull, continues to pull your rights. There is no amount of abridgment of our rights of mankind that would satisfy some of the would satisfy the government sector. There's always something new, always some other thing that they want to do. This air quality thing, what a misguided approach to that issue. I just have to marvel that people are sitting around a table saying, I think it's a good idea that we're just going to set some arbitrary standards here that aren't really all that well based in science, and then we're going to go out and start hassling people and fining them for trying to stay warm in the winter. It just boggles my mind. How about more information and more science? Why don't we start there? Why don't we use those EPA monies that are flowing down through the DEC and flowing down from there to the borough, and use them to really set a good baseline of, all right, what the air quality in the interior, how does it compare to past generations? Has it really gotten worse? If so, how much worse? What do we know about the health effects of it? Have respiratory illnesses got worse over time? What do we know about that? Those are inconvenient questions. And I have a feeling, I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to find out that, not all that much has changed, to be honest. We've been staying warm in the winter around here, burning wood for a very, very, very long time. And it's nothing new. I'd like to see a more constructive approach, like more information. And, if it turns out there is a problem, well, let's have a constructive solution to the problem. There's technology, what do you call it, Christine? It's a hydrostatic, an electrostatic precipitator. I love that. Electrostatic precipitators are not prohibitively expensive. How about making them available on really concessionary terms to people? How about seeding a little cottage industry of people that know how to assemble those and put them together? We can turn this problem into a really good solution if we take a more constructive approach to it. But if the borough and if the EPA is not willing to play ball on that level, I'll tell you what I will do. I think Christina already mentioned this on a Facebook post, but the governor does have the power to simply just veto funds or impound funds and not spend them. And so the funding that's flowing down from the EPA via the DEC to the borough to create this mischief can just be cut off by the governor. The governor can do that, and this governor would do it if, in a very short order, those entities didn't come around. Come up with it. So that's really what I wanted to share with you tonight. I really enjoyed being here. I love it when a group of citizens get together to move the needle. I love moving the needle, and hope to be able to work with you to do that in Juneau.
Since you're so much more well-versed in financial matters, I'd love to hear your opinion on a lot of the unions and even some non-union back a lot of the new bills and stuff to reduce or well, usually to reduce taxes on the oil companies to help promote business up here. And I'm curious, and then other sides want us to raise taxes on oil companies. And I'd love to hear your opinion on which you think are most effective.
Right. So I mentioned earlier that, that we need to get oil flowing into the pipe. We need to get these fields into production. One of the things that is holding them back is a very unstable tax policy. We have changed our tax policy 7 times in the last 12 years as it pertains to the oil. That is just thoroughly irresponsible. That's the sort of a tax policy you would expect from a banana republic. You'd expect to see that in Venezuela, and they have. Venezuela has appointed. But that is not what Alaska should be doing. Several years ago, we enacted a policy called Senate Bill 21, reform of a very misguided program that preceded it called ACES. Senate Bill 21 has been an unqualified success. I mean, even its supporters didn't realize that after the passage of Senate Bill 21, we would immediately go from 25 years of 5 to 7% declines in production to leveling off to starting back up again, just that quickly. It was just remarkable. So we've got to keep on that tax stability. It's essential. And then we also owe the small independent companies oil tax credits. And those are important too. Those are legal obligations. You go out there in the world as a political jurisdiction and you incur legal obligations, and then you welch on those obligations. You've got a credit problem. You've got a reputation problem. So we've got to make good on it. So, I'm not one to say let's repeal taxes or get carried away cutting them further, but we absolutely need to stabilize. We're getting our fair share now. In fact, all the drumbeat to increase taxes, Senate Bill 20, than the previous ACES regime used to. So we're doing fine, and we just need to keep it up. Yes, sir.
One of the reasons that I feel Walker's put in the position he's in now is Governor Parnell's handling of the National Guard issue. It turned into a big fiasco. Governor Walker made a lot of promises that he was going to come in and change things up. And then as soon as he got inaugurated, that fire kind of went out. The adjutant general he put in place happens to be married to one of the Fulberg colonels that was protecting a lot of the people committing these acts. I'm certainly the last one to fault somebody on the acts of their spouse, but you can't tell me that a retired military intelligence officer had no idea what her husband was doing.
Well, I don't know.
So as the governor, ultimately you are the commander-in-chief, just as the president is the commander-in-chief of all our military on a federal level. What are your thoughts on the National Guard, and what would you do to put that ball back in motion to get the mess fixed? Because ultimately, I mean, my family was directly impacted by the issues of the National Guard. As you can tell, I left quite some time ago, but regrettably, I left behind a lot of the finest soldiers I've worked with before, and I hate that they're stuck in the situation they're in.
The whole National Guard situation, absolute mess. There were problems there, and I'm convinced that there's probably still are problems there. That's all very true. What really frosted me, though, was how the problems were exploited by the state's largest newspaper. Headlines 3 weeks leading up to the election between Parnell and Walker, just slamming front page, top of the fold news, this latest aspect of the scandal, that latest aspect of the scandal. And guess what? After Election Day, that all just kind of went away. The election was over, a mission accomplished. So I think, yes, there were problems and there continue to be problems, but also those problems were exploited for.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
That's the way that happened.
I recently read an article, I think it was ADN as well, that was talking about a lot of it did just kind of just get dropped and disappear. But it's just the problem is still there.
The problem is still there, and that really comes down to management. It comes down to what kind of a culture you have in the organization. The military is a bit different, but it is also part of the state of Alaska, and the same rules, regulations, and expectations apply to the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. That's one of the things that I bring to the job. That really, very few governors, if any, in the past have brought to the job. It is serious management skills. I've been running sizable organizations for many years, 200 employee organizations, 15 years old. I've built teams, know how to create a culture, I know how to force a culture, I know how to assess people, I know how to understand when they're doing a good job and when they're not doing a good job. Managing people happens to be one of my fortes. So my approach to that would be to build solid teams and make the standards and expectations crystal clear. Have ways of monitoring those and enforcing. In my company, I'll just, we're getting close to our time, Christine, but in my company, we have our supervisors get 360-degree feedback process. And we kind of cycle through. We do for 6 months, one cohort, and then another cohort for another 6 months. And we find out what the employees, and colleagues, and superiors think of our leaders. Then, based on that, if we find really horrific problems, we have to make some changes. But we find that, okay, strong in some areas, not so strong in some other areas, and then we offer coaching for managers. Even if they're already good managers, they still get a coaching program. So those are the sorts of things from the private sector. Government's is not the private sector. Government is not a business, but there are techniques like that just based on good, solid management principles that can really go along addressing that sorts of problem.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Christine, thank you.
Well, we're just about done. I'd like to actually just tell a quick story and thank Mr. Sackett for the inspiration. I went spelunking in Missouri, and I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and as I was coming out, it was a steep incline, and my vision was starting to go. I couldn't see, and I couldn't differentiate or see what was on the rocks. And there were some baby diamondbacks on those rocks, and I couldn't see them. And my mother told me to stop, and I was willing to obey my mother, so I stopped, and I could tell the fear in her voice. And she kept telling me to move in the direction, but I couldn't see the snakes. And so she pushed me out of the way, and she went to wailing on these baby snakes with a rock and killed them. And for those of you that know anything about snakes, the babies, they can't control their venom, so they're more dangerous than the adult snakes. And so I just wanted to encourage the speakers and you guys running for political office, because really you're like my mother in that situation where you are literally, you have the vision, you have the focus, you know exactly what to do to protect those who cannot see. And I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thank you for coming. So, all right, thank you very much. Good night.